First up, we have Blind Channel with Exit Emotions. And if you want to hear a bit more insight into this album, make sure to go check out my interview with Blind Channel on this very channel. The band is pretty much outside of my wheelhouse for the most part. Violent pop, nu metal, some alternative rock stuff. It's not necessarily my bag. But when these guys do it, they do it in a way that is fun to listen to from start to finish. Think of them as kind of like a Finnish version of Electric Callboy, and you'll start to get the idea. It's just fun, it's heavy, they tackle some real stuff going on in this album, and on this particular album they get some outside help with some outside writers and guest appearances, all to make the music the best that it possibly can be. And for someone who usually just sticks to metal, this stuff is very enjoyable, and it just might be for you as well. Next up, we have Devastator with Conjurers of Cruelty. This is my kind of black metal, thrash metal, black and roll, all combined together just to create some fun black metal to listen to from start to finish. Think of bands like Midnight and you start to get into the right direction here, but of course Devastator does it in its own way. The songs are short, sweet, the album is just filled to the brim with great black and roll, black thrash, the perfect production for this style, and lyrical content that really adds up. Everything about this album simply rules, and if you love black and roll and black thrash, you need to check this album out. Coming up now is the 10th album from Firewind, known as Stand United. And with a band like Firewind, you would think that they would have a lot more albums than 10, but they're all about the consistency and quality over quantity. Of course, Firewind is that very consistent sound of power metal, heavy metal, and Gus G's ferocious guitar style, and you get that in spades here on this album. You also get George from War Drum taking over the helm for Firewind in the vocal category, who fits in just perfectly. This is another great album in the band's discography, and it really doesn't need to stand out from the crowd because all of Firewind's work just works so good on its own merit. And if you're looking for some just great, consistent power metal and hard rock, the brand new Firewind album will be. Next up is Metro Society with the London Conspiracy Chapter 1, 1898. Now, this is a brand new band to me, and I think it's because their debut album came out the year I graduated in 2007. But what I hear here on the sophomore album is very, very intriguing to me, combining the best elements of progressive metal, creating a very interesting concept, and leaving you wanting more, especially with it being Chapter 1. I'm very curious to see where the rest of this thematic piece goes. But for here, there's a lot of great heavy moments going on here. The production is a bit raw, but I think it really fits for the style of music, and it's just some great prog metal. And if you're looking for something that's a little more on the underground side for that, give this one a shot. Up next, we have Suicidal Angels with Profane Prayer. The 8th album from this Greek thrash band shows the band coming out of the pandemic much more mature, wiser, but keeping that consistent sound of thrash that they love so very much. Of course, there's some dynamics on this album, but you know what you're getting with the Suicidal Angels album, and it's pummeling, it's meant right from the heart, and the lyrical content is a bit more varied on this album about the world around us. So if you want a little bit of a history lesson mixed in with your Slayer-infused thrash metal, this is an album that must be coming up on your radar. Now is Salt Dusk with Antithesis. This sophomore album from Emily Hightower is an amazing display of how you do black metal, folk metal, and combine so many different layers of different styles of music to combine some of the most evil sounding but beautiful sounding music out there in 2024. On the debut album, Emily did everything herself. On this one, it is a full-on band, and you can really hear the different layers of different influences going on throughout this album, but that does not take away from the Salt Dusk sound, and it just makes everything feel richer and fuller. This is a surprise album for me, and I'm gonna go back and check out the debut album after this one, because I thoroughly enjoy what's going on with this. And if you need something of that folk black metal sound, you will love this album. I guarantee it. And finally, for brand new albums that come out today, I have Volcandra with The Way of Ancients. This is a brand new discovery for me, and it might be my discovery of the year. Well, at least for bands that have put out more than one album. This album contains everything that I love about mellow black, folk metal, mellow death, progressive sides, and so much more. There's so much melody and harmony to this album amongst all the brutality, the evil sounds, and everything else that's going on with the band. Combine that with some American songwriting, combine that with some brutal moments, and you get one of the most fascinating metal albums of 2024. This one's gonna rank very, very high in my top 100 albums of 2024, and it only gets better with every repeat listen. First up for this is the band Counting Hours with The Wishing Tomb. This sophomore album from this near doom supergroup features members of Shape of Despair, Rapture, The Chant, and Cinnabon Urn. And this is everything that I love about doom metal. Thankfully, due to a recommendation, I got to check this one out, and this is by far one of my favorite doom metal albums of 2024 so far. It combines that great funeral doom, gothic doom, melodic doom style that I love so very, very much, with very deep, hard-hitting lyrics, profane production, and just everything that you would want in this style. If you want to hear what all of these members of these bands are doing outside of their main projects, you need to check out Counting Hours. You'll be glad that you did. Coming up next is My Darkest Time with Fragile. Now, this album is an absolute paradox to me, because it's gothic doom metal, death doom metal, and Christian music? Yeah, bet you didn't see that coming, did ya? Well, unless you already knew the band. But My Darkest Time combines Christian elements of the darkest times and finding salvation in this style of doom metal. Now, it won't be for everybody, and it'd be crazy to think it would be, but for those with curious minds, you should give this one a shot. As for myself, I listen to everything from Neil Morse to Rotting Christ, so religious matters don't affect me positively or negatively when it comes to music. I just want to enjoy good stuff, and this is some good stuff here. The vocals won't be for everybody, but if you do enjoy it, you will love it. Awesome production, and stuff that makes you think. Give this one a shot for all inquiring minds. And finally, my biggest blunder of the week, for getting it last week, it is North Sea Echoes with their debut album, Really Good, Terrible Things. Ray Alder and Jim Matheos back together from not creating music with Fate's Warning to create something very different here. It's got some great ambient moments, some progressive moments. One song gets particularly heavy, and of course, the emotional lyrical content of Ray Alder is here in strides. I love this album to death, and it's not in my normal wheelhouse of enjoying much more heavier music, but I love this album. It really makes you think. It's really good for your mental health when you're feeling low and it feels like you need something that matches up with it. It's great to hear Jim and Ray writing again, and I just can't wait to see what's next. First up, we have the debut album from the Toronto band Apogene with Cyberstrictive. Now, this, of course, is on the label The Artisan Era, and if you're familiar with the label, you know what you're going to get here. High quality, top-notch, technical death metal. If that's not for you, I completely understand. But Apogene really does do something that I really appreciate here. There's a lot of peaks and valleys within the music. Of course, it's super technical. It can turn on the turn of a dime. There's so many things that are going on with it, but they really know how to write songs, and they know how to show off that masterclass musicianship without just showing wankery. And Max Smith, formerly of Croesus, is the lead singer of this band, and it's incredible to see what he can do outside of Croesus. If you need some new tech death, and if you need something from the Artisan Era, you need to check out Apogene. Next up, we have the legendary band Exhorder with Defectum Omnium. This is the band's fourth album since 1990, and once you know it, they only have 4 albums to their name, but I feel like the band just keeps improving on age. Slaughter at the Vatican is one of the most influential thrash and groove metal albums of all time. In fact, a certain band decided to go along with that entire genre and flip to what they used to do and started going in this style. Wouldn't you know it? I bet you can figure out who it is. But no, seriously folks, Exhorder is back, and they're just putting out some killer music here, with a lot of great punk and hardcore influences mixed in with their thrash and groove metal. It's very aggressive, very left-wing from what I got from it, and I appreciate that. Thoughts and prayers all over this album. This thing rules. And I'm so happy to see the band still together in 2024, rocking just as hard as they did back in 1990. If you want to prove that legacy bands can still put out some of the best albums out there, check this thing out. Next up, we have the Metal Blade debut of Ghost with Prophecy. This is a one-man project who covers such a wide gamut, and it's for the metalhead and the non-metalhead alike. If you love 80s synthwave, there's something here for you. If you love horror soundtracks, of course that's here. If you love industrial, oh yeah, there's plenty of that. And if you're looking for something on the extreme side of metal, wouldn't you know it, that's here too. It's a conglomerate of all of it. And it all makes sense and it doesn't sound like a giant hodgepodge. It works to perfection. This album feels like the soundtrack to an album I've never seen, but I really, really want to. If your love goes from John Carpenter to Anil Nathrak, you're finding something in my heart. This album rules, and yes, it is an instrumental album. I think it's really beneficial to the music. There's a reason why Ghost is getting so much claim to fame lately. Why don't you go check them out for yourself and understand why? Next up, we have Midnight with Hellish Expectations. This album was written in retaliation to their previous album, Let There Be Witchery, and you can really tell. The songs are shorter, sweeter, only comes in at 25.5 minutes, and it's some of the best material the band has ever done. The songs are just absolutely killer from start to finish. It's everything that you love about the black and roll, black thrash, and rock and roll styles that Midnight has always been known for. And of course their love of Motorhead will always shine through. Seriously, Midnight is one of the greatest bands on Metal Blade Records, and this album just proves that you don't even need a half hour to prove the power of what Midnight is all about. And finally, for the brand new music that comes out today, it is the brand new album from Sonata Arctica with Clear Cold Beyond. Now, I bet you're surprised that I'm talking about this album because, you know, obviously in the last 15, almost 20 years, Sonata hasn't really been doing the power metal thing. They've been going in a much more theatrical, hard rock, and, I mean, they went into a lot of different directions. But here we go. In 2024, Sonata Arctica is back to writing a full-on power metal album, and the world can finally rejoice. Yes, this is easily the best album that they've done in a very, very long time, and I would say it easily beats everything once they stopped doing power metal. Even a song that's still very tongue-in-cheek, like California, can be funny and awesome at the same time. You love the double bass, you love the guitar chugging, you love the grand keyboard wizardry, and of course, Tony Kakko's amazing vocals. Everything that you loved about Sonata Arctica is back. First up, we have Blood Opera with songs in the key of death. This album is just pure fun from start to finish. But of course, you really have to be into the 80s and 90s cheesy horror metal to really appreciate this. Now I'm talking about that down and dirty, B-grade grindhouse horror. If you like that, plus you love 80s music, this has everything in strides. You got horror songs that are about The Omen, The Fly, Candyman. They got Tony Todd to do the intro to the song Be My Victim, which is all about Candyman. That tells you everything you need to know right there. And of course throughout it, there is a skit story going on talking about the creation of Blood Opera, the band Blood Opera, and them coming back to life to, well, I won't spoil it for you. But if you love your cheesy 80s, 90s metal, and you love that grindhouse horror, this is meant for you. Next up, we have Electric Deathbeat with a Ghost Triangle. I tried talking about this last week, but the footage went missing somehow, some way, so I'm doing it now. This album is something that took me by surprise, because there's a lot of bands that are doing the modern metal, melodic death metal thing going on. Too many to mention in a short thing here, but Electric Deathbeat does it quite a bit different. Imagine a much more brutal soil work. Like Speed really got his gutturals going, where it almost sounds like it's like grindcore, brutal death metal. But you also mix that in with some of the finest cleans I've heard all year, and also just a magnificent display of musicianship and songwriting going on throughout all of it. This is an awesome album. The production might be not in some people's favor, but I personally dig it, and if you want a great modern take on modern metal, but just a tad bit more brutal, you should give this one a shot. Next up, we have the brand new album from Haunt with Dreamers. I can't believe I'm saying this. This is the 10th brand new album from Haunt, and the band started in 2017. That is absolutely insane to me. But what is also absolutely insane? How good this album is. It is the perfect display of heavy metal, revival metal, and just what Haunt has been doing ever since its inception. Trevor is just one of the best songwriters in this genre, and the fact that he pretty much puts out an album or two every single year just blows my mind. And what makes this one stand out from the other ones? I easily gotta say it, it's the production. On so many of Haunt's albums in the past, it has that raw sound, but it sounds good. On this one, there's no denying the incredibility of everything that's going on in the production on this album, and it makes everything stand out. This is the perfect album to check out Haunt, and even though it's not on Spotify yet, go everywhere else and check this album out. Next up is Louise Lamont with Lifetime of Tears. This album took me by complete surprise, and I just discovered it this past week despite the fact that it came out in February. It's always why I'm glad I check out Bandcamp to see some stuff that I might have missed along the way. This is listed as death gospel, and I totally understand why. There's elements that aren't really death metal but deals with the idea of death, and it's done through an electronic rock, alternative rock, soul, R&B kind of feel, also with some Swedish ingredients mixed on top. This feels like a very ceremonious, dark, cathartic album of like sitting in a graveyard and getting your emotions out. It's such a strange display if you are a metalhead and you've never heard anything like this before, but you really should give this a shot if you want something that's adjacent to metal, but really feels like it's from the heart. And finally today, to make things very, very wacky, it is the return of Sleepytime Gorilla Museum with Of the Last Human Being. The band has finally returned after 17 years. Yes, it has been since 2007, and oh, that's the year I graduated high school. Time really does fly, doesn't it? But on a better note, this album is absolutely insane in all the right ways. It's everything that I've loved about the band since I was in high school, and everything that they've learned from their experiences along the way. Everything you love about the band is here in their avant-garde style. It is just as smart and quirky and absolutely insane with musicianship as you could want. The fact that this album came out and they're going to be doing a full-fledged tour going on right now is just incredible to me. Go support Sleepytime Gorilla Museum if you want something left to the left of center. Coming up first is the band Aborted with Vault of Horrors. Aborted is one of my favorite brutal and extreme metal bands, and they have shined once again with Vault of Horrors. Being able to showcase a different horror movie and a different guest appearance on every song, featuring members from Despised Icon, Flesh God Apocalypse, Shadow of a Tent, and so much more. There's so much going on with this album. A lot more melodic moments than you would necessarily expect in a band like this. Of course, all the brutality and extreme moments that you would imagine from a band are covered throughout this album, but it's just so great to see all the different takes on all these different movies. Of course, the singles have the things like The Thing, and it's so fantastic to see them going in this direction. My personal favorite Aborted album is Terror Vision, but the more that I listen to this album through and through, it's very possible this could be my favorite Aborted album of all time. But we just have to get there. Until then, enjoy this album. Coming up next is a debut album from this New Orleans band known as Brat with Social Grace. This is grindcore, death grind, power violence, or as they like to refer to themselves as, bimbo violence. This debut LP is all over the map, going from great hardcore moments to pure power violence insanity, with this kind of grace behind it, no pun intended, that is very, very intriguing. Of course, in that grind and power violence style, the album is 10 songs long and 20 minutes in length. This is well worth your time if you enjoy that style of music, and you really need a good kick of that power violence and death grind sound in 2024. This band takes it in a completely different direction, and it feels so appropriate for what they do. I can't wait to see what's next. Next up, we have Dragon Force with their brand new album, Warp Speed Warriors. If you already don't like the band, I'm pretty sure you're not going to like them here. If you already love the band, you're probably going to enjoy this album as well. But that is not to say that this album is just another Dragon Force album. It's a bit of a different direction here, and I'm still trying to figure out my thoughts on it, but I will say I enjoy when they do harken back into the power metal sound that I knew them and loved them for. But also at the same time, they have really fallen into the meme an influencer style. Like, the fact that Herman Lee is a gigantic influencer in the metal community heavily affects this album. You can see it in the music videos, you can see it in the writing style, and all of the guests on the album. It's poppier, it's catchier, but it does have those power metal moments thrown in. If that sounds like your kind of party, you might enjoy this album. Coming up now is probably the most avant-garde album I'm going to be checking out all year, because this thing is so left to the left of center, I really don't know how to describe it. It is an album known as La Suspendia, consisting of members of Kilter, Andromeda Anarchia, Growler's Crier, and Seven Sons. This album is so strange to me. It is something that I can't even describe on YouTube without getting flagged when it comes into the lyrical sense, but musically, imagine a mix of the most avant-garde experimental stuff mixed in with metal, jazz, contemporary, and modern music, all mixed together to create an opera that is a monologue. If this sounds like something that you are willing to experiment with, I implore you to check this out because there's some amazing stuff going on here. But this album is not for the faint of heart. Tread lightly, but feel free to trend. Next up, we have Lords of Black with Mechanics, a Predacity. Ronnie Romero and company are doing some amazing work here with the more heavy metal and classic metal inspired side of what he does, and of course the rest of the band being able to show off that hard rock, heavy metal, and power metal side. This album is another slab of why I enjoy Lords of Black so much, from the tremendous vocal display, the amazing songwriting, production that just fits so perfectly well, and a good look into the world from the past, the present, and what could be the future. Lords of Black always knocks it out of the park, and I'm glad to see they have not lost touch here in 2024. They're continuing to go strong, and I can't wait for the next album already. This is some fantastic stuff, and if you've never checked out Ronnie Romero, you need to check this thing out immediately. Up next is the band Lutharo with Chasing Euphoria. This is my first foray into the band, and I gotta say, I think I found one of my new favorite albums of 2024. This combines everything that I love in the styles that they're going for. It is mellow death, it is power metal, just a little bit of prog, just a little bit of thrash, and some of the catchiest, heaviest moments that I've heard in this style. There's something about Canada being able to do melodic death and power metal so very well. I'm not sure what it is, but they do it amazingly well, and you need to check it out for yourself. Everyone a part of this band is doing phenomenally, amazing production. Again, such catchy material on this album. I hope Lutharo makes it far, and they have been growing ever since their debut album. I can't wait to see where they go from here. I got Ultimas with their sophomore album, Epic. This three-piece supergroup is consisting of David Vincent, Flo Monnier, and Blasphemer, and they create the perfect blend of catchy, almost melodic, but downright evil black and death metal. And that's something we can all go for in 2024. The musicianship on this album is absolutely extreme and so catchy at the same time. I don't know how they pulled this off. David Vincent, especially after talking about how he doesn't like indecipherable vocals, really puts on a very clear growl display, so you understand everything that he's saying. And of course, the music on its own stands on its own. This could have been an upstart band and it would have been just as heavy and cool. Seriously, give Ultimas a chance. It might be flowing under the radar, but you need to give it a shot. And finally, for brand new albums that came out today, I have the debut album from Whom Gods Destroy with Insanium. Bumblefoot and Derek Sherinian wanted to continue to work together after the implosion of Sons of Apollo, and they're really showing off the heavy progressive metal side here. And of course, they got the one and only Dino Jalusic on vocals here, and he is one of the best rock singers in the world today. This album goes across the board, getting as heavy as Meshuggah, getting as classic prog as like King Crimson, or even Deep Purple for more of a mainstream kind of feel. It goes all over the place, but it makes sense, it all works together, and of course it has that little bit of wackiness and quirkiness that I expect no less from this combination of people. And it's so different, and I mean that in the best way possible. Of course, Art of Anarchy just released an album a couple weeks ago which had Bumblefoot and Jeff Scott Soto, formerly of Sons of Apollo, so it's great to see this other side also seeing the light of day. First up, we have Gray Skies Fallen with Molded by Broken Hands. This is another favorite discovery for me in 2024, and I'm so glad that I found them because this is purely up my alley, especially with where my mental state is right now. This is dark, gloomy, gothic doom metal in the likes of November's Doom, My Dying Bride, and Opeth. So yeah, that's right up my alley. It's Americanized as well. It really has this great sense of feel behind it, excellent production. You can tell the band has gone through a lot of grief on this album, or they just really know how to write about it, and it just hits so close to home. I love everything about this. It knows when to speed up, it knows when to slow down, it knows when to write the best music possible. Gray Skies Fallen might be underrated for you. You may not have heard of them, but you need to give them a shot if you want to hear some great progressive-esque gothic doom metal. Next up, we have Intermissing with The Diary, and I can't believe the band is already 10 albums into their career, and The Diary is really showing some of the strongest moments the band has ever had. 6 tracks, all over 7 minutes long. Everything here just really has that gothic doom metal feel behind it. Heavy emphasis on the gothic and metal side of it. Of course, some doom along the way as well, and little herbs and spices from other things as well. But I thoroughly enjoy what really feels like what might be the most authentic Intermissing album to date. It's dark, it's brooding, it's a great reflection for where the band is at right now, and if you are into the gothic or doom territories, I implore you to check this album out. It is more than worthy of your time. Up next is the one-man project Notio with Worldview. Albert Olli from Finland has created such a super catchy, melodic, progressive metal album. It almost tinges onto the progressive death metal side, it almost hits into the power metal side, but everything in between works perfectly for this band. Albert's vocals have a little bit of a Hansi from Blind Guardian feel behind it. I'm not sure if that's intentional or that's just his vocal range, but I think it works so well with the music. And just being able to explore all these different territories into progressive metal and having such great production and songwriting behind it, this is an underutilized album, I really feel. Not a lot of people are talking about this, but you need to check this thing out if you're a modern prog fan. Seriously, there's amazing craftsmanship here, and you just might dig it for yourself. Up next, we have the 5th album from Skeletal Remains, Fragments of the Ageless. This is just the pure definition of death metal. While it does go into a little bit of different territory, sometimes a little more brutal than your normal death metal, sometimes a little bit more proggy than your normal death metal, it just really showcases everything that death metal can and should be. If you love the old school stuff like Obituary or Morbid Angel, that is throughout this entire album. If you want something a little more on the proggy side, you can definitely hear moments of like Pestilence or even early day Edge of Sanity going on here. And of course the band just experiments with their own influences and just really being themselves. The band just crafts another masterpiece after another masterpiece with every single album. And yeah, without question, this is the band's best album to date, and if you're just looking for that pure, genuine death metal, it doesn't get much better than Skeletal Remains in 2024. And finally, we have the 3rd album from the band Turbulence with Binary Dream. Now, you don't really think of Lebanon as the hotbed for progressive metal, gent, jazz, that kind of stuff. This album might turn things around when it comes to that. This album rules. I love the proficiency that's going on here. The band knows what influences to incorporate and what to be able to make of their own. Of course, the one thing that might throw some people off is about half of the album is instrumental. Some of the tracks are pure instrumental, but I think even if you don't enjoy instrumental music, you'll be able to find something to really appreciate here. And when the vocals do come through, they absolutely shine. Yes, this is a prog album through and through, with influences of gent and jazz and other stuff. But I really think you should give this a shot if you're looking for some new flavorings in your musical listening, because I think you'll find something here that you truly enjoy. First up today, we got Fur Gallico with Future to Come. This Italian power metal band's 4th album continues on with the trend of their Celtic power metal sound and folk metal, but also shines a little bit more of what they're capable of. It's everything that you've loved about the band, but just a little bit more modernized, a little catchier, production sounds fantastic, and really makes you want more of that folk metal sound that I wish was continuing on to this day. If you've never checked out this band before, but if you like the likes of Helveti, you'll find something to really appreciate here. Coming up next is the band Hamfer, with an album title I'm going to translate from Pharisee, but the hand of the Lord is strong. Being able to take place in the Faroe Islands, this concept album describes the war that happened in the Faroe Islands, but describes it in such great detail, musically and lyrically. The music matches the tone so very, very well. It is dark, it is brooding, it is that death doom that I love so much from the band. And this is some of the best material the band has ever done to date. And if you're looking for some very war-themed, very historical death doom, you gotta go with Hamfer. Up next, we have Hammer King with their 6th album, König and Kaiser. This is some of the best material the band has ever done. Taking a couple years off to be able to write this album, and of course the pandemic, has really made this album so very, very strong. Taking war elements and of course the Hammer King going into much different territory, from Arabia to Atlantia, to even what feels like a cyberpunk kind of feel. Everything feels so perfectly with this album. It has such a great diverse feel behind it, but it feels like Hammer King through and through. Titan Fox V and company have come through once again to create some of the best power metal of the year. All you gotta do is check it out for yourself. Next up, we have the brand new project known as Haller with Rebirth. When Terrence Haller left the Italian progressive power metal band Eldridge back in 2022, he wanted to create some solo music, and it definitely went into a different direction. Rather than progressive power metal, it decided to go into a more 80s AOR feel. You can feel the neon spread throughout this entire album. This couldn't be more 80s if Madonna wanted to dress you up in her love. This is a great love letter to that genre while still sounding quite contemporary and enjoyable for modern audiences. It's very strange to see him go in this direction knowing where he was in the past, but I really dig what's going on here. And if you want that throwback to what is 40 years ago now, give this one a shot. Next up is the band Leaves Eyes with Myths of Fate. The 9th album from this band is kind of a renaissance for the band, where you can really hear the old school feel of what's going on with them. Of course, with the band being around over 20 years now, they wanted to be able to harken back to some of the earlier material, show off what they're doing in the present day, and potentially what to look forward to in the future. Of course, with Liv Christine not being in the band for the past few albums, I know there is a bit of a polarizing feel with this, but I still think you should give this a chance. And if you've never checked out the band before, if you enjoy the works of anything from Epica to Nightwish, you're going to be able to find something to at least appreciate here, if not enjoy further. It may not be for everybody, but I still think if you like that symphonic gothic metal sound, give this new album a shot and get that retrospective of Leaves Eyes with brand new material. Next up is the debut album from Canada's own Omnified with A Tale of Fire. This is some progressive death metal and technical death metal done to an absolute T. I can hear as much Opeth influence in here as I do Obscura, and that can really throw some people for a loop, but I think they do it in a way that is really satisfying. You can hear them go over the top on the fretboards and doing insane blast beats, but you also hear that melancholic melodies and harmonies throughout that really makes the music stand out compared to their contemporaries. And considering this is just a debut album, there is so much room for growth, and I can't wait to see what will be happening on subsequent albums. But until then, if you're looking for that pure, raw intensity with some really melancholic feels, you'd need to give this one a shot. First up is After Infinity with their self-titled debut. Some Finnish power metal here, and it's so great to see that resurgence of Finnish power metal here in 2024. This stuff keeps a modern tinge, but also harkens back to the glory days of power metal as well. And when you have so many great Finnish voices from bands like Dreamtale, you're doing something incredibly right. I love what's going on here. It's super catchy, it's got some great production behind it, and again, with it being a debut album, I am so curious to see what's going to be happening with this band in the future. Incredible stuff here, and yeah, I can't wait to see what's next. Up next is Bloodshift with their third album, Cosmic Grave. This is brand new material to me, and I'm really enjoying what I'm hearing from this band. It has that element of horror punk that you would find in a lot of bands like the Casualties or the Misfits, but it also has like a heavy metal and, dare I say, doom metal feel behind it as well. The songs are a bit longer than what you would hear in punk, but it's nowhere near as long as you would hear in some of the grandiose heavy metal, doom metal sounds. It feels like it's perfectly right in the middle. And when you add that horror aspect and all of the lyrical concepts, it makes it a very intriguing listen. I'm surprised this is coming out in the middle of March instead of closer to October, but hey, it's plenty of time to be able to get that ready for your Halloween trick-or-treat list. But also until then, give this one a shot if you enjoy your horror punk and heavy metal. You'll find something to enjoy here. Next up, we have some brand new Polish power metal with Eagle the White and the Divine Comedy. This debut Polish power metal album is something that is quite intriguing to me, kind of like I talked about in another sense in a previous review, where I talk about war being a central theme. And of course, this isn't like Sabaton style power metal. This is more of a traditional style power metal with some more war themes going on within it. And I do appreciate that this kind of touch with it. And as you don't hear a lot of power metal coming out of Poland, it's a very intriguing listen when it comes to that as well. But also there's some great soaring vocals, the compositions are very well made. The production is a bit raw, but I also think it really adds to the atmosphere of the album. And yeah, another debut album. I'm very curious to see where the band goes from here, but until then, if you're looking for something a little bit different in your power metal, but still a bit more traditional, give this band a shot. Next up, we have the band Einvigi with Monochroma, and I had no idea this album even came out until after it came out, and I'm very disappointed in myself as I love their previous album so very, very much, but this was more than worth the wait. I love everything that's going on here, from its post-black, black gaze sound, to its folk metal elements, to, of course, that alternative rock kind of production and songwriting style that is very captivating to those that aren't even into this particular genre. Everything about this is so cool to listen to, and even though I don't understand a lick of what they're saying as it's all in full-on Finnish, I love the emotion that's being drawn out throughout the vocals and the musical compositions. It really grabs your heart even if you don't understand the Finnish language, and if you're looking for something that has that kind of extreme kind of feel mixed with Alcest, and even, I dare say, that 90s alternative sound, I think you found something really cool here. And yeah, listen to it and see for yourself. Up next, we have Eternal Autumn with Below the Lightless Heavens. This is the band's return album after nearly a quarter of a century, coming in at 24 years ago. And it's great to see this band, who really did start out in that 90s Swedish, Scandinavian melodeath sound, and hearing what they're doing in 2024. Of course, you can hear that modern day sound to an extent, but it still does have that great old feel of like the early day Dark Tranquillity at the gates, and even some Opeth moments when they get some acoustic stuff going on. It's dark, it's heavy, it has melodeath, and that great acoustic sound behind it as well. I know this one might be going under the radar for a lot of people, but if you really enjoy the 90s metal scene over in Scandinavia, you really need to give this album a shot, as it is a very raw underground album that might be just what you're looking for. Coming up next is Licebearer, with a name that I cannot pronounce, so I had to translate it into English from Danish, with the album title, Like a Light in the Night, We All Must Find Salvation. And it's funny, that's a very powerful, uplifting statement, but it's also done through atmospheric black metal and post-metal, which you wouldn't necessarily think would fit into something like that, but hey, that's how it works. The vocals on this album might be a bit polarizing for some people. It really has that very stretched out black metal feel behind it, and the music doesn't necessarily match up with it, but if you listen to it enough times, I think you'll be able to see what they're going for here. It's kind of a polarizing album, but I think it's something that people might enjoy if you like things a bit more on the extreme side. You really like that post-metal, black metal feel behind it that's not necessarily in the post-black or black gaze feel. It's done in its own kind of way. So give this one a shot if you're feeling a bit saucy. Up next is the band The Moor with Umbra, and this might be my favorite release that I talk about this week. It's been a bit of time since their previous album, Jupiter's Immigrants, and that review, I actually coined the phrase progressive dark metal, which they seem to fully embrace and start even categorizing themselves as, which I feel very thankful for. And with this particular album, they definitely continue on with the progressive and dark metal feels behind it. You can hear parts of, like, say, Nevermore. You can also hear Hypocrisy on this album. There's a little bit of Opeth feel behind it, and of course their own sound from The More. Everything that I loved so much about their previous album, they seem to amp up and change just enough to make this album its own entity and make it truly stand out in this style. And if you're looking for something with that really dark feel behind it, with just enough prog behind it, I definitely implore you to go check out The More and Umbra. It's definitely going to be one of my favorite albums of 2024, but what about you? Up next is Oblivion Winters with their sophomore album, 'Tis the Season for Sadness. This is the band's sophomore album 14 years after their debut album, and sometimes it takes, the better half of 20 years to be able to get something done, but I'm very glad to see that this thing came out. It can be a little bit polarizing with their style of almost funeral doom metal, but I really appreciate what's going on here with its atmosphere, its songwriting. The vocals are a bit polarizing as well too, but if you dig the style, I think you're going to be able to find something to appreciate here. It is slow, brooding, and just like the album title suggests, it is a nice cheery album. It is a very sad album, and it really does make you have a lot of feelings come attached with it. Again, I think this is another great one for all of the dark, brooding doom metal fans out there. Yeah, listen to this one and see what you think. And finally today, we're ending with the most brutal album that I'm talking about this week. It is Shock Withdrawal with the Dismal Advance. 3-piece band that just absolutely captures everything that you can love about grindcore, grindgore, death metal, extreme metal, with shorter songs, a bit of a shorter album, but everything is laid on display. Punches you in the face, it tears your soul apart, and it leaves you wanting more. If you're looking for something of more of like that cattle decapitation kind of sound, aborted, but you want it a bit shorter, kind of like some Napalm Death, this is an album that you need to check out. This trio is absolutely insane and has created a masterpiece of extreme metal. All you need to do is check it out for yourself. First up, we have Black Absinthe with On Earth or in Hell. This sophomore album from this Toronto band really feels like a strange conglomeration of classic heavy metal, speed, punk, and even southern rock. Like, I can hear Motorhead in this album. I also hear Molly Hatchet in this album. I also hear other conglomerations of other forms, but the least of which you can say this definitely sounds like a very creative album from the band. It really caught me off guard with how catchy it really is, considering how many different styles are on this album, but I really do enjoy it. They've fine-crafted their sound into what they are, and I really hope a lot of people catch this one. If anything of what I just said seems like it would be up your alley, give this one a shot. Next up, we have Coffin Storm with their debut album, Arcana Rising. This trio is a very strange take, as it's Apollyon, Bestial Tormentor, and Fenris creating something that is not black metal or extreme in any sense of the word. They feel like they're creating some classic heavy metal, some classic doom metal going on here. Like, I can hear equal parts Cathedral, and I can hear equal parts Pentagram on here. Of course, it's always going to have that Norwegian black metal flair to it no matter what they try to do. But it's so interesting to hear them trying to go back and cover music that's getting near 50 years old in style and making it come out in 2024 sounding very authentic. The vocals won't be for everybody, but if you do want to hear Fenris do clean vocals, yeah, go ahead and listen to this one. Next up, we have Rage with their 40th anniversary album, After Lifelines. This is a double album that feels very distinct from each other, but fits so perfectly together as well. The first disc, Afterlife, is straight up Rage. And no, for the uninitiated, I am not talking about Rage Against the Machine. I am, of course, talking about the superior German power metal band, and it just sounds like everything that you love about the band. On the second disc, Lifelines, it is the band experimenting with a symphonic orchestra. The band still sounds like Rage full on, but hearing those emotional string sweeps and the other instrumentations of the orchestra really backing up the power of these songs, it feels so natural together. And of course, when you mash them together, Afterlife lines? Nice little pun. It's great to see a band doing a double album like this, celebrating their 40th anniversary, and putting out some of the best material the band has ever done. Next up, and the final brand new album I'll be talking about for March 2024, is Sum 41, with their final album and double disc album, Heaven and Hell. This is an album of two halves. The first half, Heaven, is very much of that late 90s, early 2000s pop punk sound that most people know them for, and this feels like it never lost a step. This feels like it just came out right after Does This Look Infected? When you can pull that off and it sounds authentic, you've done a great job. The second disc, Hell, is very much of their heavy metal days. I compare it to the album Chuck, which I feel is their superior album. Some people may disagree, but it's great hearing that heavy metal side, but also that just right amount of pop that goes along with it, and also a very curious cover of the Rolling Stones Painted Black. If this is the note that they're going to be going on, this is easily one of the best ways that you could go out, one of the top albums the band has ever done. First up for what I missed is The Bleak Picture with their debut album, Meaningless. And boy, does that hit home. This is a very melodic death doom album that really hits home for me. The lyrical content is a great description of how mental health works when you're battling your demons, and the music matches it so perfectly. Melodic in the right parts, full of that dreaded doom, and the vocal display really matches up. The fact that this is just a debut album has me so curious about what will happen with this band in the future, and if you can already hit that tone on your first album, it's only going to get better from here. Next up, we have Chapel of Disease with their fourth album, Echo of Light. This album is a bit of a downer because even before the release of the album, the band basically imploded and almost the entire lineup left the band. But with that lineup, they really did create something magical. They have some really killer stuff going on here, starting off from the early day death metal sound of something like Morbid Angel or Death, and really coming up with something that sounds like their own. They're doing some great progressive death metal stuff, hitting some like 80s hard rock moments in times, and did I hear the occasional blues solo once in a while? Yes, I did. This album hits so many different territories of rock and metal, but it sounds so very cohesive in the way that they do it. There's a reason why there was a lot of hype behind this album, and I feel foolish for not checking this album out sooner. This is some top tier stuff. Next up is the band Siverus, or Shiverus, I'm not entirely sure, with Maze Envy. This sophomore album from this LA band combines the best of blackened, death, and doom metal into one conglomeration that can hit all the different territories but still sound cohesive. It does kind of have like a maze kind of feel behind it. It's not just a great album title and especially album cover. It really does match up with the music because sometimes you can feel lost, but once you figure everything out, it all comes together nicely. It can be very slow and brooding. It can hit the tops of the most extreme death metal and everything in between. If you're looking for an album to pair this up with, I highly recommend Spectral Voice with their brand new album Sporagnos. That would be quite the tour, and I would love to see that happen at some point. But until then, check them out. But also check out Maze Envy if you're looking for something that hits all of the extremes. Next, we have the German duo known as Daunt with their self-titled debut. Yes, another debut album coming from Germany this week, and this really hits the territory of like the really heavy doom, stoner doom, sludge metal style. It does pick up in variations in tempo throughout this album, which is a nice change of pace compared to a lot in this style. It will not be for everybody, but if you want someone with some really good atmosphere, really tackle some good mental health stuff, it is a daunting album to get through, but for those that enjoy this style, they're gonna be very happy when they climb the top of this mountain, because there's a lot to explore and a lot to enjoy. And with the debut album, I can't wait to see what's next. Next up, we got Fall of Serenity with Open Wide, Oh Hell. This is the band's return after 17 albums since their last album in 2007, the year I graduated. Time just keeps on slipping. Although it feels like the band hasn't lost a step here. It is the melodic death metal sound that I remember them from yesteryear, but also with some black metal elements that might have been there in the past, but I'm just really starting to pick up on it on this album. It's a great throwback to those early days of the Scandinavian melodeath sound, but updated just enough in 2024. It's great to see the band back, and I hope this is not just a one-off. I want to see what comes next. Next up is Moon Incarnate with Hymns to the Moon. And wouldn't you know it, another German duo debut album for this week. What are the odds? Well, this album definitely goes down into the more gothic doom territories. It's a bit more raw, it's a bit more very static, but I think it really fits in its favor. Imagine bands like My Dying Bride, kind of combined with some, not all, but some of the gothic overtones of Moonspell, and especially that early day Anathema Death Doom sound, and you start to get the idea of what Moon Incarnate is all about. There's a lot of spoken word on this album, mixed in with growls, and I know that won't be everyone's bag, but if you dig that kind of style, you're going to find something to appreciate here. And yeah, I can't say it enough with debut albums. This is something that's so curious to me, and I'm very curious to see where the band's going to be going on from here. Next up, we have Necrophobic with Into the Twilight Grey. 35 years into this band's career, and this is their 10th album, and dare I say, potentially their best album that they've done. It feels like they finally, after all these years, figured out that magic formula about what to make black and death metal work, especially in the style of Necrophobic, and they do this album to perfection. Every song on here rules. It's just that perfect combination of what you expect from the band, a little bit of new influences, but not too much, but just overall that authenticity that you really want from a band like this, otherwise it's gonna fall flat and stale. There's a reason why so many people have talked up this album, and I wish I would have heard this album sooner, but hey, I'm glad I still caught it in the first quarter of 2024. This is how you make black and death metal. All other bands in the genre need to take note. And finally today, we're hitting back to Germany and Finland for this band's 5th album, the band known as The Order of Nosferat and The Absence of Grace. This is pure black metal with gothic keyboard overtones that really kind of adds that dungeon synth, but also that really creepy old school horror vibes attached to it. And of course, you should know what the lyrical concepts are all about with a band name like The Order of Nosferat. If you don't, you got some history to do. This band's 5th album, I think, is their best album just for production value alone. This album is actually very, very enjoyable to listen to, even though it does have that harsh black metal guitar tone from the early 90s, which is kind of hard to listen to nowadays, but they make it work. And I'm glad I discovered this band, and I'm gonna go back and enjoy the previous albums more, but really, if you're looking for something quite the vampiric overtone, you need to give this album a listen.